All right. Should we give everyone a couple more minutes as people are now trickling in?
We're gonna have to entertain him if we're gonna do that.
I'm now looking at the clock. So how about this? How about we kick it off and we'll get it started. And I'm just so grateful that everyone was able to take the time out of their busy schedule to join today's webinar. We'll be discussing the hidden values of the long tail backlog and smaller projects that have big value. But before we jump into our conversation, I am absolutely honored to welcome best-selling author and analyst Charles from Intellex and former CTO and tech industry veteran Bill Murphy from Cresting Waves. And I'm Sarah Thorson, today's moderator. All right. Well, one more thing right before we jump in is I would love to kick off our call with a cheers. So good, better, best. Till your good is better and your better is best. Cheers. Kicking it over to you, Charles, to do an introduction.
Here we go. There we go. Do we unlocked? All right, there we go. So I get to drink and then talk. I like it. So it's just like being in a bar. Well, I'm very excited about this conversation because one of the things that I love in my role as an analyst is I get to explore ideas that maybe are not the things that everyone is talking about, and to see what they mean, particularly in the context of enterprise IT, which is really where I've spent my entire life. And so this particular report that I guess this conversation is kind of based on was called Unlocking. Actually, I don't remember the title of it, but basically Unlocking the Hidden Value in Your IT Backlog. And the idea was that there is this hidden treasure trove of value hidden in and of all places, this backlog. So every organization, so my background is I ran IT operations for about $1 billion healthcare firm 20 some odd years ago. I spent almost my entire career in enterprise IT. And a backlog is just part of our existence. It's part of our day-to-day life, right? It's always there. We can never seem to clear it. People are always yelling at us about getting everything done. And so the question is, well, could we look at this differently? In fact, has the way we need to look at it shifted? And so the point of this analysis was actually based on Chris Anderson, who wrote a book called The Long Tail. And so the question was, well, was there some alignment here? And I believe that there is. And in fact, the idea behind The Long Tail was that well, we're used to in the historically about like a movie or a record album. I'm dating myself, albums, but that there would be this big blockbuster hit, and that would be it. And if you weren't signed by the studio or given the record contract, you weren't going to be this big star. And the long tail was this idea that the Amazons of the world came around, and suddenly there was all this value in this long chain. You didn't have to be the big blockbuster, win. All you had to do was find an audience where there was this thing. So that's the idea of the long tail. And so what intrigued me was examining this from the standpoint of, do we have the same kind of situation? Because in the world of enterprise IT, the blockbuster hit is that big, giant $100 million ERP project. But what about all that long backtail of those the smaller projects, right? Could there be this really hidden value in them? And so that's what this analysis is about. And I'm not going to go through all the details here, but the basic gist of it is the answer is yes. And the biggest reason is because IT and technology has become so critical to the enterprise that we are missing some of the traditional ways we've looked at it through an ROI window. We miss how some of that value is being created because the nature of value creation itself has shifted in this digital era to that of the customer experience or the employee experience even, but this idea of experiential demand driving value. And so many of these small projects are actually about creating, curating, or sustaining those differentiated winning experiences. And then the last little piece that the report sort of delved into is the fact that a surprising way to unleash that value is, shockingly, through integration. And the reason is because, well, there's lots of moving parts, which I'm sure we'll talk about, because in our pre-talk, we chatted about some of this. There's lots of pieces you have to do to unleash this and to solve the backlog problem. But integration is one of these key linchpins because so much of these experiential demands are tied up in the ability for organizations to connect within themselves and within their broader ecosystem, because that's what customers want. They don't want to have to think about where the data is coming from or how all of this works. They just want it all to work. And so integration is sometimes the fastest way to unleash at least some of that value, because it just opens the door to that. And then, as I dove into a little bit in the report, there's hidden complexities with that as well that you have to uncover. But that's the gist of it. And I know in the pre-conversation, Bill has some really interesting perspectives. So I'm looking forward to a fascinating and enlightening conversation about exactly what all this looks like.
Yeah, Charles, thanks for sharing with us. You know, for everyone, my background, I am a managing partner at Cresting Wave right now. We connect innovative new technologies to a tech leader community of which we understand the key challenges and match them to the right solutions. Prior to that, I was the CTO at Blackstone, and prior to that, I was the founding CTO at Capital IQ. So about 25 years in trying to manage that backlog, Charles, in some way, shape, or form. I think the backlog moves or has become bigger because people are more engaged with tech, right? So they know what's more of what's possible, and once you know what's possible, you ask for more things that are possible, and then that continues to grow. So there's a bit of like a healthy nature to the growth of the backlog, because it means that you're building engagement inside of every enterprise where people want more. The first CTO who ever comes to me and says that their backlog is 0 or continues to go down, you probably want to. I'd be very dubious because I've never met that person, and good luck to them.
And you're saying a lot, right?
Right, exactly. So that's my initial reaction to your research, though, is really around the hard versus easy. Is what kind of dictates what gets on the backlog versus what gets off the backlog too often. And I think, other than the big sexy project that has the headline for the organization, a lot of the more difficult and dovetailing with your last comment, the integration heavy projects sort of take a back seat to the easier ones. So you get sort of like the headliners, and you get the super easy projects, and then in the middle are the hard projects that stay on the backlog for a long time because you got to involve a lot of parties in order to make them happen. I do believe that we're probably underestimating the value that can be created by executing on all of those projects, because it's a daunting task to even start in a lot of cases.
And out of curiosity, just to hit on the high value of the backlog items that are overlooked, do you have any examples to share?
Well, I think, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to listen, like most of the silos that are created in today's enterprise IT are like relatively easy to stand up, right? If you go to buy Workday for your HR, you can stand it up in the standard way, and okay, it'll work. It's a SaaS platform. Same holds true for your CRM. Same holds true for your expense management, your ... your Jira, bug tracking, so on and so forth. So every enterprise IT organization has all of these silos, and they're pretty fast. So everyone loves doing something that's fast and shows value. So they like stand up the silos. Everybody gets excited. They ring the bell and they declare victory. And then the next requirement is, what would be great is if our Workday employment data automatically went into our general ledger and booked all the transactions, or that I could look from the general ledger directly to the employees that we paid and how much, or that the expenses from the expense system would automatically go into our purchasing platform to give us a better view of what we're spending and why. And so it's often like right after a major deliverable, all the rest of the stuff is integration related, and then people never prioritize integration as high as they could. So you wind up with silos of value, but the true value is trying to create one connected technology ecosystem. I don't know, Charles. Hopefully you.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example from the other end of it, from being on the consumer side of this. And in fact, this is opening to one of my keynotes, and it's sort of the cautionary tale. So, a year and a half ago or so, I was very excited. I decided I was finally going to break down and get a set of wireless headphones. In fact, here they are, my Sony they're absolutely fabulous product. I can't pronounce their model. It's like XM1000. It's a horrible, Sony has to get their branding down. But anyway, great product. And so I finally decided, and if you're anything like me, the minute I decided I was going to get it, I wanted it right now.
Right.
And so I went and I resisted what I would normally do, which is go to this online company who I shall not name that starts with an A and ends with Amazon, right? And I decided there's this whole effort of trying to buy local and support our local businesses and whatever. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to go to Best Buy and see if they carry it. And sure enough, they did. And sure enough, it was in stock at our store just down the street. I live in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. And so it was like a 19-block walk. And so I left my house walking those 19 blocks, super excited because I was going to get my headset. And I get there and I walk up to where the thing is and I go, because there was nothing there. And so I find a salesperson. I drag them over and I just point and go, And she goes, oh, yeah, somebody entered the system because we're digitally receiving it, but we haven't actually received the system yet. And so we'll get him here next Thursday. And so dejectedly, I walked home slowly. It took me twice as long to walk those 19 blocks back. And here's the big lesson learned is that, I went home and I bought it on Amazon ahead of the next day. And what they taught me was not to trust their system. Right? Because their online system on their web told me that it had it, but their in-store system was out of sync with that. And I guarantee you, this was a combination of a cultural issue and an integration issue, that it was too hard to make these systems talk in real time. And so just nobody cared. And so the impact was not only did they lose this $150 sale, they lost a whole bunch more behind that. Right. Because not only have I never bought anything from Best Buy, I now tell literally thousands of people this story. Right. And so when I talk about the hidden value, it's that, right? Somebody did a prioritization of how important it was to get these systems to talk in real time so that their online web systems were up to date. And someone did a prioritization and said, no, it's not important enough. And the value of that is what they couldn't quantify in the simplistic kind of ROI models that they would use in the past.
Yeah, and I think ROI models are, a recipe to do the easy, the obvious, and it's almost impossible to say for sure whether that lack of integration is going to cost you a sale, Charles. And the people who grade the ROI models are accountants and engineers. And you know what accountants and engineers like? They like precision. So when they can't tell for sure whether it's going to cost you, they say, well, we're going to leave it out of the ROI model completely. And then you're always undervaluing the sort of the value of elegance of an experience because it's impossible to measure or difficult to measure. And so I've seen that happen over and over again at organizations.
Is there a particular strategy to develop the ROI model? Is there anything that would work just to make that integration, to make everything talk to each other? Is it the simplistic, I can't even say it, simplistic model that you were just referring to, Charles?
Well, I think there's two things. I mean, the integration part itself is thorny, which is to Bill's point, why a lot of people skip it. they stick to the things that operate in their silo or within their sphere of influence or domain of control or whatever the term is. So I think that's part of it. But to his point, ROI is a flawed approach, right? So I think, if you're trying to solve for this problem, I think you need to address the technology. So the integration layer itself, as well as some other elements of it, to address to make this feasible. One of the things I wrote in the report, it doesn't do any good to fix the structural problems we'll talk about here in a second if all you're going to do is move that bottleneck down the line. If you solve some of these structural problems and then you don't have the technology up to speed to move fast enough, then all you're doing is you're going to completely undermine your efforts, because all of this cultural shift you're trying to drive runs head smack into broken technology that just wasn't built for this kind of constant adaptation. So that's one thing. But specifically to what Bill's talking about, Price Waterhouse is working on a methodology they call ROX, return on experience, which I think is a great mechanism. I know a couple of enterprises that have sort of developed their in-house alternative, in most cases overlaid. So instead of just an ROI measure, it's 2 layers. It's ROI. So we're looking at the tangible, the precision, as Bill said, and then a second layer that is looking at sort of a range modality where understanding what are the pros and cons, or the potential range of benefit at an experiential level. The difficult part is it's very hard to measure. And so you have to change the way you're looking at it to get that. But I think those are the kind of approaches that you have to bring in tandem to make it work.
My view on it is that the traditional ROI models are appropriate to put on top of some commandments of thou shall not make the same mistakes over and over again. And usually those are thou shall not build systems that don't interoperate with each other. Thou shall not master data in multiple places such that systems can't talk to each other. Building closed systems is a no-no. You want to do it in a service orientation wherever you can. So I think it's important for the tech leader to lay out those commandments, and then if you have general agreement on that, and that can also include the customer should have a great experience. I know that's a squishy term and hard to measure, but if you really commit to a great experience, you know it when you see it, or we're going to commit to the least amount of clicks as you could possibly have in order to get the job done, stuff like that, and lay out those fundamental beliefs of what you want to achieve as a tech organization. And then as long as you're not violating those, then do a ROI analysis, to your blue in the face to prioritize on top of those foundational values.
I think what is critical is, though, this, and this is, that cultural element, because what will sort of happen if you're not careful is that the de facto rationalization still occurs, which means you don't even push in some of these projects into the official backlog. So I didn't talk about this in the report, but there's sort of the backlog and there's the unofficial backlog, right? There's the stuff that people want to get done. They just have stopped asking for it because they're so tired of it being, the can being kicked down the road. And so you also have to sort of solve for that, where you open up, I think when we were talking before, Bill, this idea of an innovation first kind of mindset where you change your starting point. And then, to his point, it's perfectly fine to still, you have to look at the ROI, right? We can't just throw money endlessly. I mentioned before, I'm a sailor, right? The joke is a sailboat is a hole in the water that you poured money into, and I used to joke that that's what IT was to most people in the enterprise, the hole in the basement you poured money into. And so we always have to be able to justify the investments we're asking for and that we're making. But I also think you have to sort of start with a different starting position to start driving this change.
Yeah, and Charles, going back to your Best Buy story, is there a metric or a benchmark on lost sales that could justify the multi-channel integration?
Sure. And I'm not a retail expert, but there definitely are. The big challenge that we were sort of joking about in when we were talking in advance is that part of the problem with this long tail is that a lot of the stuff that has gotten shuffled off because they're in this medium range that Bill talks about are actually things that would instrument to give you the visibility around those metrics. So in many cases, these organizations don't have the metrics. They don't have the data.
Yeah, those are a couple of the other commandments: is never throw any data away and instrument everything. And if they had done that, they could be able to make these value judgments, and maybe the ROI comes out differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you see an opportunity for fast and easy innovation, going back to the innovation first mindset?
Well, I think that there's a real, the other thing I wanted to mention on that was the rise of shadow IT is also the people who stop putting stuff in the backlog are also the people who go off, develop relationships with vendors, buy stuff, implement it, and then tell their technology team after that, and cause all kinds of problems down the road by not having integrated systems and haven't thought through the problem. So I think you can be fast if you develop the muscles to create that velocity in your organization. And it's just like if you're planning to run a marathon, you don't not train and then go out on the day of the marathon and expect to run fast. You have a whole training regimen in order to get you ready to be able to perform in that race and perform the way that you expect. So, the the rules that I talked about and those values are like, that's like training. That's interval training and long distance runs and easy run. Like all of that is setting the foundation such that then you can be fast when it counts. And most organizations are not willing to put in the pre-work, because there's the number of times I've been in meetings where across tens of organizations at this point, where everyone says, we're committed to the long term. We really want to build it in the right way. We're totally ready to spend the time. Bill, you're right. Let's do it right. Let's do it great. There's one thing I want to add, though. Let's go forward. As long as I totally want to do this, as long as we can see value in 3 months. And you're like, what? Like that, it's crazy. I mean, if the rule on the vaccine would have been like, listen, we're going to go and try to make a vaccine for COVID. As long as it gets done within the first 2 months, we're all for it. And then clearly we wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So we would have quit way too early. So sometimes you have to push through some of these hard things in order to lay the foundation of training such that you can go fast in the future.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I've been in way too many of those meetings myself. But what is interesting as well, you go all the way back to how do you drive innovation, and we touch on kind of all these different pieces, and the reality is they're all tied together, they're all interlinked, right? And the integration piece of this is also tightly interwoven to everything that we're talking about. And so when Bill brings up shadow IT, I had this I did a web talk show for Intel for about 1.5 years, several years ago. And one of the people that I had the pleasure to interview was Patty Hatter, who at the time was the CIO and COO of not McAfee. Maybe it was, whichever one Intel owned. Anyway, I'm going to blow that. But anyhow, and I remember when she was telling me the story about when she took over. She was the COO first and took over as the CIO. And the first thing her people came to her, right? Her new senior leadership team from the IT department came up and said, okay, we need to squash shadow IT. And her response was, no, we don't. It was exactly what you were talking about. The fact that if someone is going out there and quote unquote building shadow IT, that is a clear sign that there's value in that backlog, that they have things that are going to generate value that they need, that they aren't getting help. And so her first statement was, our job is to not be afraid of it, but to embrace it and to bring them into the tent so that they are partners in this with us. And it's sort of become a benchmark for me, where it's like I can sort of tell where a CIO is landing by asking their opinion on shadow IT. And I did this just the other day, talking with the CIO from SurveyMonkey, and the question of shadow IT came up, and he gave that exact answer. It's like, no, we're not. That's not something we're worried about. They're our partners. They are people. We have to be working with them to enable them. And so if you look at that, that's a kind of a cultural statement. And then you look at the integration stuff we've been talking about and the ROI stuff. What these all are these about removing the barriers, bringing everyone into sort of the same mind space about what it is you're trying to create, so that you can move more quickly, so that you can innovate, and that you can find this value that's hidden in these little projects, mid-sized projects all over the place, and bring them to the market. And that's really what happens. And it in my opinion, it starts to become self-managing, right? Because people start recognizing they're going to invest their time and energy, and those things are actually generating value when you're dealing with these different folks.
Yeah, I do think, though, like the only thing I would disagree with a little bit would be that I guess you want to subsume the shadow IT, which I think is sort of basically what you said, and take it over. But make sure that the problem with shadow IT is not that you don't want to have people take advantage of tools. It's just that normally the person who's implementing that shadow IT only has a smaller view of the organization overall, and there needs to be that bird's eye view. Mm-hmm. And you need tools that enable that to happen. Like ideally, you'd want that whole let 1,000 flowers bloom wherever they were to be planted, as long as the seeds were the same and people you didn't do anything that was going to harm you later on, right? And that's I guess it comes back to, again, like that central set of governance and rules, if they can be maintained, and tools to enable that to be done easily. Now you give people opportunities for quote unquote shadow IT, but done in a way that IT doesn't hate it.
Yeah, it is really about, and again, it's the entire same conversation. Part of the reason I love what Digibee is doing is because it's an enabler of this entire sort of mindset, right?
Yeah.
It's about not trying to figure out how you're going to say no or saying, we have to do this, we have to control this. It's about how do you make it possible? How do you enable it, right?
Yeah.
And when I wrote my first book, I interviewed a bunch of CIOs, and one of them was a gentleman by the name Ashwin Rangan, who at the time was CIO of Edwards Life Sciences. Now I think he's the CIO of ICANN. But he talked about the fact that he saw his job as being this sort of weaver, because he expressed exactly what you're talking about, that, someone in a functional unit, well, all they care about are their problems. And that's great. They need to solve their problems. But his job was to make sure that what they were doing was aligned to all the other concerns across the enterprise, that they all wove together, and that we weren't creating these silos and islands of information and data and all of those kinds of things. And so it's the idea of shadow IT, of resolving the shadow IT problem, is about getting them out of the shadow. It's not about removing it from them, from my perspective. It's about getting them out of the shadow so they are a first-class citizen in the problem-solving effort you're trying to do. But going all the way back, to make that happen, to your point, you better have the tools that make that possible. If they can't participate, then it's over.
Yeah, and like as you were saying, and I wrote down self-service, turning shadow IT into self-service IT, where the tools are provided in such a way that people can take advantage of technology and make use of it to drive those value propositions and ultimately clear some of that backlog, right? Because I had a really interesting experience with Anaplan, which actually holds a lot of the same lessons for Digibee is bringing to market. Is if you can put in place a solid technology foundation and give it to users who can then take advantage of that, they'll go solve a lot of problems on their own. It's pretty amazing the ingenuity of motivated quote unquote business people to take advantage of technology. It was a long time ago in my Capital IQ days, we built an Excel plugin that pulled financial data, and we had never imagined that it would be used for the use cases that it was put to work on. Once we found out what our customers were doing with it, we were really blown away. The intricate nature of the systems that they put together around our data pulling those were not the use cases that I had modeled when we built the platform in the first place. So it was great to see.
Yeah.
All right. Out of curiosity, what do you find most causes the backlog in today's enterprise environment? Would just love to know your POV on this.
Well, I'll go first, I guess, on that. I mean, I think it's simple. I mean, and Bill said it earlier. The demand. We're in an era where everything is powered by technology. I mean, I joke about it that back when I was running IT ops for this healthcare company, we were, like I said, about $1 billion. We had several hospitals. We had a bunch of clinics. And I started this job before we'd grown. And one of the things I always did when I started a new position was I walked around all the department heads and kind of introduced myself and understood where they were. And if you've ever been, had to be in a hospital, the place you always start is admitting, right? And so I was in the admitting department and talking to the head of admitting. And I kept looking down. I'm talking to her. All right, we're sitting. I kept looking down. And the reason is there was a stack of downtime forms. I'm curious, Bill, do you know what a downtime form is?
No.
No. See, and it's partially, this is unique to healthcare, but the reality is nobody knows what these are anymore, because what exactly what they sounded like is that if the systems were down, you use them to write down all the information so that you could still admit the patient. So as part of our disaster planning protocols, you had to have downtime forms in the admitting office. But to have them out was very bizarre. So I asked her, I said, why are these out? And she goes, well, our systems are going down 5 or 6 times a day. Why would I bother putting them away? Now, as the guy whose job it was to fix that, that was really not good news. But here's the message. She wasn't really upset. It was like an annoyance. It was like this fly buzzing around her ear. It was just bugging her, but it wasn't really affecting anything, because guess what? Patients were still getting admitted. Patients were still getting care. No one was dying. It really wasn't mattering. Today, oh, forget that, right? Nobody knows what downtime forms are, because technology powers everything. Every last bit of the experience of our business operations, everything. And that makes it incredibly critical, but it also means the demand is off the charts. And what's ironic is most IT organizations today are not much bigger than they were when I was running IT. And so we've become incredibly efficient in IT, but the pressure is ridiculous. And it's actually why, in my opinion, one of the reasons it's so hard to solve this problem is because how do you fix it when all you're doing is trying to keep the plate spinning? It's like, we don't have time to figure out it.
Yeah. Now, let me add on that. Like, my view is like there's more demand than ever that Charles said. There's the same resources or too few resources generally. And we've gone through several monumental shifts in technology architecture, and it's hard to, like, think about if the US government had changed the way electric was delivered 3 times in the past 25 years, how many people would be like, well, I have a converter at the beginning of my house that converts it to the old because I didn't want to pay for the wiring, and so on and so forth. That's what technology looks like, is that there's so much tech debt built up, right? So it's a real negative flywheel, and then there's like so positive flywheel when you fix it, right? If you have too much technical debt, you have too few resources to pay off the technical debt, and you have more demand than ever, means you cut more corners, you build up more technical debt, and so on and so forth. You grind yourself into the ground. Now, the only positive on this is new technologies like Digibee, like cloud and other cloud technologies are making it easier to repay that debt. So that's a positive. Now, on the flip side, the folks that what I've been amazed at is all the companies that are doing the best in the world, the most valuable firms in the world, are the ones that understand this. Yet everyone hasn't taken the lessons, right? Pay off your technical debt, make your technology teams more efficient. That creates velocity, which burns down the backlog, which adds value to your business, which does positive things. So you can get the flywheel spinning properly. It's just a lot of effort to get it going initially and turning it over. And those companies, like, everyone laughed at Amazon in the early 2000s when they didn't. I got tired of reading those articles about how they didn't make money, right? And everybody was like, oh, they don't make profits, they're a terrible company, poorly run or whatever. But they were building those foundational capabilities to obviously be this majorly influential and valuable company today. And everyone needs to do some magnitude of that in their technology stack in order to create velocity in the future.
Yeah, very, very true. No question about it. Well said.
And then, so what's the movement with CIOs and CTOs going to business positions that are related to solving the backlog and the tech debt?
Well, I'll be curious to hear Bill's take on this, because he's sort of living it. But I see it both ways. So I think the best CIOs and CTOs have definitely are moving up into like COO roles or operational business roles, mostly because, to what we just talked about, the technology is so critical to running the business that increasingly the business is saying, hey, we need people that understand the technology to a greater depth to actually run these business units. I remember interviewing that same show with Intel, a guy who came out of IT and he was running digital agencies. And his opinion was there will no longer be such a thing as a chief marketing officer anymore. It's going to be a chief marketing technology officer because it's so embedded. Yeah. And the counterpoint is, though, that we're also seeing a movement of business people moving into senior IT roles, specifically CIO roles, not so much CTO, but CIO or maybe a chief digital officer role. And those are often signs that the organization is struggling, that the IT organization is too technically focused and not solving the business problems enough, i.e. that backlog is being resolved with ERP projects, but not for the things that are generating competitive value for that organization. So I think you're seeing it move both ways, and they are both sort of indicative of what's happening within that organization.
I think more cross-pollination, the better, between roles for people. And I do think that there is a pigeonholing of technologists that is starting to stop, but it could go even faster, because core business skills are important in every single function. However, the frustrating piece that I'm still seeing and hearing is I don't understand why it's okay for business people to say, I don't understand tech. Like, that is a cop-out. And there's no way that, as a technologist, if I came in and said, I don't understand English, so I'm just a technologist. So, or I don't understand what a balance sheet is. I'm not I'm allowed to just go my whole career without learning that. We need curiosity on both sides. The technologists need to get out of their holes if they are in one and learn the business value and be business people. And the quote unquote business people, non-technologists, need to show much more curiosity about the how. And cross-pollination is a good way to do that. But I think it's like, really, it just needs to happen everywhere. And every person has to have technology as part of their job.
So I've been saying this for a while, and I'm curious if you're seeing it as well. But IT was actually, as much as IT got flack, and deservedly so in the early days, IT people were horrible at not speaking the language of the business. I mean, they literally had no idea. And I think it's still somewhat of a rampant issue in the technical depths of the IT organization. But I don't know that I've met a CIO in the last, 5 years that wasn't intimately familiar with every aspect of the business. And I think part of the reason we're seeing them start to move up into the COO or other non-IT roles is because they, a good CIO who is taking this approach has the best view of what is going on across the entire span of the organization. And so to a certain extent, I think IT's been leading this charge because, to your point, there's a whole bunch of non-IT execs that I meet that still have that, well, I don't understand all this technology stuff. And that's a problem. And the other problem, and I'm curious, Bill, because you probably see this a lot more, is at the board level. It's even, I think, even more dire. I think most boards, think we're still that AOL and dial-up is what, and I'm being facetious, but just barely. I mean, I think most boards are so ill-informed about how intricately woven technology is into everything they're doing. It makes it very hard when you're having these investment decisions, especially if they're big enough to get to the board level, to get them sold because they have so little understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dynamics around boards are, I've been on like 20 boards, and it's even as a technologist, the issue is complexity. And so because complexity is growing dramatically, so now even when the CIO is, business first CIO, they often get so far away from the technology because there's only so many hours in the day. So then they become less able to do their job as a technology strategist because the world's moving too fast, right? So the pressures on that leadership position are higher than it's ever been. And then from a board perspective, try explaining, like I joked that, when I was at Capital IQ, I had like 5 vendors that mattered when we started the business, like in 2003 or something, 4 years in. It was like Microsoft, Dell, you got to get your colo vendor, you got Checkpoint Firewall, and maybe an EMC disk array, right? And you could explain that in a board meeting, be like, here are the 5 pieces of the technology architecture, here's how much we spend on each, and here's why it's important. And the board members are like, okay, maybe I'm not a technologist, but I sort of get it. It's now, to have any meaningful discussion about the technology of a complex organization would require a 1,000-page pre-read for the board members. So it's impossible for them to opine on it. So they don't try, or they aren't given the materials to enable them to try. And then you just go back to analyzing the income statement and looking at compliance risks, because that's what's sort of easiest to do. So it's like, I think that the fundamentals of the system are a little bit broken because the complexity is so high. It's almost like a car. Like I remember my grandfather used to, and how many times I would go over his house and he was like under the car with one of those rolling things, changing the oil or fixing something. And when was the last time you saw somebody doing that? The cars are too complicated. You can't fix them yourself to the level you could with the old cars. And a lot of the same lessons could be said for IT.
I was chuckling when you were telling that, when you were talking about this, because I remember back a long time ago, we were running System 36s and whatever, and we had built this big giant data center, and we had a power outage. And of course, I come running into our data center to see what's going on, and I find my CFO sitting there with this big grin on his face, because the only thing he understood is he wrote a big check for a UPS, and all the lights were still blinking. Right? It was like, so yeah, no, it is. It's a very challenging thing. It's going to become more complex, and it does make these issues to get through to solve some of these issues and around the backlog and releasing this value. It requires all these different pieces, right? You have to start solving the structural issues, you have to address the cultural issues, the educational issues, and you have to solve the technology issues, right? And that is why a lot of people, frankly, don't do it, but it's also why for those that do, it's a massive opportunity.
Right, and the platforms that can enable it are the ones that are going to be super valuable. You like to enable the complexity to fade into the background, right? Is the goal, and anybody who does that creates a ton of value for their companies and for their customers.
Yeah, well, and actually, it's a really great point, because there's actually two ways that you can do that: one good, one bad, right? You can falsely do it by effectively bearing that complexity by creating these sort of rigid systems, and it's this veneer. Or you can do what this kind of new class of technologies and tools doing, like DigiB, right, where it's about this abstraction and about creating this ability to you're not masking the complexity, you're just giving the enabling it to be dynamically adjusted based on whatever the needs are, right? And that's the trick. That's why cloud, I mean, I remember when cloud first came out, people were going on and on about how it's going to be revolutionary, and they were talking about cost. And it's like, listen, when you guys start talking about the right thing here, that it's really about agility, then suddenly we're having a meaningful conversation. And so I think there's this whole thing that is just, people are just really starting to get their head around it now.
Yeah, totally. And the thing that I've been disappointed at, but we're still kind of early innings, is that all the tools that have come out, or a lot of the tools, around taking advantage of cloud, have not democratized. I see a question around democratization of tech. They've actually been pretty developer centric, and the developer centric ethos of everything, obviously, as growing up as a developer, it makes you feel good that people are paying attention to them finally. But at the same time, tools that can be used by a much wider swath of the organization are critical to create more value. So I think that there is a way to be both developer friendly and democratizing of technology capabilities, but it requires elegance, and it requires thought, and it requires just purposeful design.
Yeah, no question.
Hey, so the lack of qualified people and the need for expanding IT staff to solve the backlog is just fueling the backlog and collecting the tools that won't solve complex problems, as you mentioned, Bill. But how do you solve the gap of qualified talent? It almost seems like a social problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I have a great answer for, other than to, I've done a bunch of stuff to try to encourage earlier, teaching of technology as a first-class citizen in high schools. And, I think we have to go back to the grassroots of, like, train people and make it unacceptable to say, I don't want to get my hands dirty, I'm not a technologist. Like, and if we start to change that culture, there's a lot of smart people out there. Everyone's just afraid. And I think we've done a bad job generally teaching technology in a way that's accessible to everyone. My wife was a chemical engineer at an Ivy League school, and her least favorite class ever was computer science 101, because the way that they taught it was just daunting. Now she's older now, and maybe they've changed it, but I haven't seen a huge uptick in, like, people who don't really know what they want to do with their life then suddenly being given an on-ramp to technology in a way that's comfortable. So I think some of these platforms, DigiB or other no-code platforms or other things, are sort of like gateway, can provide a gateway to taking advantage of technology for people who are smart and analytical, but haven't necessarily had classical training. And I do hope that, the water is never as cold as it seems like it's going to be before you dive in. Sometimes you just got to, like, dive in, and we need everyone to say, I'm just going to try. And they usually have positive results when they do.
Well, so I think you bring us some really interesting points, and I think it's worth to delve into this, because this is a very significant challenge. And I think my frustration with how people are addressing it or attempting to address it is they're taking too simplistic of a view of it. Not with what Bill's saying, but I'm saying in very broad in the industry. So the answer to this was these big giant STEM initiatives. Now, I have nothing wrong with STEM initiatives, but the whole focus on STEM at a core, where this heavy engineering, heavy math focus, is great if you want to go work for a tech company. But when we're talking about enterprise IT, we need some of that. But what we need much more of are people that understand enough of the technology to be able to apply it to solve the business challenges the organization is facing. And what is distinct and unique about this time in kind of our history of computing or of technology is that in the past, the only way to do that was you basically had to go and code this, right? And then we had COTS where you could go buy and configure or buy and code around the edges. Today, we have an entire class of tools that are effectively whatever you call them, no code, low code, these citizen-based tooling sets that allow us, as Bill was talking about, to democratize this. But the challenge with it, those tools are only as good as the user's ability to understand the intersection between the business problems and the underlying technical architectures. They don't have to necessarily know how to code, or they don't have to know how to design a network, but they have to understand the basics of security protocols and data architectures and integration layers, right? They have to understand those moving parts so that they can participate in the development of these systems. And so the trick here isn't that we need to have more developers. The trick here is we need people that are technically fluent and that have critical thinking skills and communication skills, right? Because they are serving as that buffer, maybe to a customer, maybe to business units, maybe to that executive who goes, I don't want to know the tech stuff, right? That to serve as the glue. And the organizations that are winning in the marketplace right now have been relentless at building that capability, in my opinion. And so I think it's a real challenge, and it's also constantly moving, right? Because if you're heavy into data science, and you're doing a whole bunch around AI models, well, guess what? You need a whole class of much more technical people there. But it's a moving thing.
To add to it, though, what's interesting is, like, I think every company, or most companies, are so fixated on only being a tool, only building a tool, only being a software platform, that they actually lose a lot of the value, because nobody has created these no-code tools good enough that you don't need to get through some training, right? And really, like, do some things. And what actually I do like about the Digibee approach is, like, coupling some basic services to kind of help get people who aren't developers up and running in a way that's not dangerous for the technology team is a unique approach to the market, versus a lot of venture funded software companies they refuse to be services companies. They only want to be software companies. If you really had looked at it and said, like, are there more or less consultants than there used to be? It seems like we're building all these new capabilities. Why do we need consultants for? Well, consulting industry is doing great because they're still hard to use, and you still need help in order to get going. So coupling the services with software is it might be easier. It's still not easy enough to do it without help.
Yeah, I mean, I think the services question is an interesting one. There are definitely challenges. I do think we're moving further down that road, but I think, to your point, it's also we also have the complexity challenge that's racing ahead. So every step we take in making tools more efficient and self-service, you got increasing levels of complexity because we're doing more with it. And so, there's always going to be a need for consultants. And I do appreciate that Digibee and other folks in this kind of category are taking a more holistic approach to it, right? And some consulting companies are doing the same thing, where it's about, this idea that if we don't drive this cultural transformation along with the technology transformation, then it's gonna fall apart. But you're also pointing to a structural problem. I remember back in the day, I was working with a bunch of companies and some of their investment partners, and what it came down to is we valued companies as software companies very distinctly different than we did, say, a consulting company. So we have some structural issues just in the markets of how we evaluate. Same thing. It's the same thing about ROI, or in this case, how we look at market returns. And so, I mean, there's all these challenges with how we overcome some of it. But I think that for the enterprise of just kind of taking that step back and focusing on the business problems you're trying to solve, and then assembling your set of partners that are going to help you do that. And inevitably, when you look at it from that perspective, you find that more holistic approach is going to win.
We have a question from one of our viewers, and it's around what Gartner put out as a statement, that every company is an IT company. Conversely, every employee can be a developer. What are some key points to guaranteeing that?
Yeah, guarantee, security and stuff. I mean, I don't know if everybody can be a developer. I think that that's a bit of like a misnomer, but everybody can be effective at using technology. And if you can build tools, like, I guess you would have said 25 years ago that the only people who can use Excel are people who know how to use, who are accountants or know how to use technology and have been trained, right? And now it's a core skill of everyone. Because it was built in a way that people learned it and got comfortable, and it wasn't seen as a. I remember when I first used my first spreadsheet in like 1983 or whatever. It was like like you're going to Mars, but now it's a natural thing. So I think building systems that enable a lot of people to use them without making mistakes and without breaking things. It's like some of I still. Sometimes my mom's like, I don't want to break anything on my phone, and you're just like, Mom, like, we figured that out. Like, you're not going to break it. Just
have your screen.
You reboot it, it's fine, And so I think that making everybody feel like they have tools that operate like that for enterprise technology needs is critical.
Yeah, I've always hated. I mean, and Gartner didn't say it. Somebody else said that every company is a software company, and and the Mark Andreessen software's eating the world, and I believe all of that to a certain extent. But but to Bill's point, the issue is it clouds the real point, right? It misses the actual point of this, which is just that we need to be, every organization needs to be leveraging technology to deliver value to their customers. And the only true technology companies or software companies are ones whose business is to sell technology or software. Just because you're using it, just because Amazon uses their technology amazingly well, not counting AWS, that doesn't mean they're a tech company in that sense, right? They are delivering. Where I go to Amazon because it doesn't matter what the heck I order, it's on my dang door the next day, right? That's what they deliver. They're using technology to deliver on that promise. They just got so good at technology that it literally became a business unit for them, right? But for the rest of us, it's about how we leverage that technology to deliver that value. And so the reason I bristle at those kind of statements is it actually takes an executive's eye off the ball, right? That's not the objective.
Well, right. It makes them think that they need to just do a Python course for everybody and life is going to be amazing. And like, it's not about that. It's about, you can't do that unless you have the guardrails and unless you have the systems to enable that kind of work for your broad part of your, everybody wants to go directly to Z instead of A, B, C, D, E, F. So you got to go through all the steps. No shortcuts.
Exactly.
As we are almost up to the top of the hour, Charles, I'd be interested in learning if there were any surprising keys that unlock the long tail value of integration that stood out in the white paper that you would like to talk about.
I mean, I think we already actually covered most of them. I mean, like I said, when we were talking about this and sort of doing this analysis, I do think that this idea of integration as one of those enablers is a little bit surprising. And one of the things, and not to slam my friends at Digibee, but I tell them they underplay this, is that people think about integration mostly in the context of making your systems talk to one another. And to Bill's point, there's plenty of need for that. There's all of this complexity. And it's very, very hard to do, and it's hard to sustain it and maintain it, and all those reasons, right? That's great. But the part that I think Digibee actually does exceptionally well, and that is one of the keys to unlocking this value that most people just don't spend anywhere near enough time and energy on, is this ability to leverage integration as an enabler of these highly dynamic and agile ecosystems, right? There is not an organization in the world anymore that does everything themselves, right? This whole idea of vertical integration was this big thing in the 80s, and it mostly fell apart. It's too expensive. It's too slow. It creates too much of an investment profile, all of these issues with it. And so we've got the entire world is now just in time, all of it. And so when people have experiential issues delivering value, it's almost always related to a breakdown, I shouldn't say that. It is just as likely to be a breakdown within this ecosystem as it is within their own internal miscommunication or issues. And that right now, to me, is going to be the big differentiator as we go into the future, as those who get the ecosystem right are able to enable it and rapidly adapt it are the ones that are going to be able to sustain those wins over the long haul.
And the only thing that I would have to add to that, and they do that in a way where they can see and process the entire complexity of all those interconnections, because there's too much happening to expect it all to be perfect and never to have a problem. So that's what I was excited about DigiB helping kind of bring some order to that chaos of having so many different ways to do integrations. At least let's just bring it together, make it readable, and then you can get all the value from that ecosystem without creating the risk associated with many different silos.
Yeah, by the way, give yourself a pat on the back. I think you said one of the key words too, readable. That transparency, that visibility at a business layer, so flippin' important, because again, I think that your executives who, I don't want to know this technology stuff, there's stuff moving through those integrations that are incredibly important to them, and they understand that language if you can expose it to them.
100%.
Well, let's open up an opportunity for some of our viewers to ask questions, and we will be answering them through the chat. So if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask Bill or Charles, this would be a great time.
Do it quick before I drink all my margarita.
Or maybe it'll be more fun.
Wow, does that mean I haven't been fun?
Really, that was a shot.
No.
That was a shot, Charles.
Not even close. This has been an incredible conversation. I just think margaritas make things better.
Right.
As I'm looking to see if anyone has any additional questions, otherwise we can do our final thoughts and close out our this amazing conversation.
Yeah, the only thought that I had is I'm glad to be talking about it, because I think that the important thing is to constantly be reaffirming these and trying to get this message to a broader set of people, because there are a lot of cultural needs, cultural views that need to be changed in order to facilitate this. There's no black box easy fix. We're all going to have to get better, and but the beauty of it is the world has never been more interconnected and enabled as it is today. So we should be able to do some amazing stuff with these new capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely parrot that. I think that my big message whenever I talk, in fact, it used to be part of my bio that I'm back before the pandemic, traveling the world, spreading hope and optimism about the future of what all of this means to us. Because I think, it can be a scary time. It can be an overwhelming time if you're in IT or just in business in general right now. But it is also a time unlike we've ever seen, I think, in terms of the opportunities that are presenting themselves. And so, if you're somebody, this is all new and this was information that helps you see it differently, fantastic. We did our job. If you're someone that got it, that already knew all this sort of coming in and you've just been nodding your head along, that's fabulous. You are an exception. You are not the majority. So get out there and spread the word, help people understand all of this, because we need to Bill's point, we need to get everyone on board, because this is kind of the do or die moments, right? That those organizations that get this and start making these transitions are going to be the ones that have a fighting chance going forward. And those that lag behind thinking that it's going to pass, they're going to be suffering.
Agree. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. And cheers.